In this video I'm going just to analyze or to give some thoughts about a post that I'm reading on LinkedIn by Aisha Rawashte. Aisha identifies herself as a fresh graduate of English literature and language, and she is an English teacher, so I assume that the piece of wisdom that she is now spreading here on this post, and it's really wise by the way, is directed to people who have just graduated from the university and trying to find themselves in life. So let's read what she's saying. This is in Arabic and I'm going just to translate it into English. She says, work is not what makes you successful. In other words, doing and repeating doing the same thing over and again is not going to make you successful. Real success comes when you work on yourself, when you develop your skills, and when you learn from every learning experience. The chair and the job are not the criterion. The criterion is the way that you use in thinking. It is your persistence, it is your ethics in approaching things. These are what makes the difference, she says. And finally, she concludes by saying, let your work be a means and not a goal. These lines are very interesting for me because they catch my attention first of all, from a systems thinking perspective. So the idea that work, she says, work is not what makes you successful. In this way, we are trying to refute a perception by some students who graduate from the university and have their own perceptions about reality. There are their own perceptions about life that's going to happen in the future. So they start, according to this post, by saying that if I work hard today, tomorrow I will be successful. In other words, if A, then B. In other words, we're talking about linear relations between the variables in our lives, and from the system's perspective, this is not working, this is not going to work. This post is saying this is really not going to work because it isn't the right perception. And when the post says real success is when you work on yourself, when you develop your skills, when you learn from every experience, this is telling us that there could be perceived success versus actual success. And then something very interesting that is the talk here about. It's about the change in the mentality or the ways of thinking, the ways in which we think, and our persistence and insistence on repeating things by applying new things or new learnings that we have. She's talking also about the ethics. This is another variable that has to be taken into consideration. And then finally she says, it's a means. Working is a means. Getting a work is a means. Doing something is a means. It's not the end. And just imagining yourself to be sitting on a very beautiful chair in a company like a manager, like an employee, it's not going to be the end. It's not the criterion to say that whether you succeeded or not. Even sitting on that chair doesn't necessarily mean that you succeed. These are just the main issues that are there in the post. I have taken that into consideration and try to find the variables that are there. What do you mean by the variables, or let's say the seeds? I get the seeds there, throw them in the screen, and I try to see some kind of relationship between them and try to understand them, how one affects the other in this system. So from my understanding, let's talk about the seeds and the variables that I have made. We have so many, and I really mean so many because I haven't counted them, but I noticed that there could be at least 2 stocks. And I mean by 2 stocks is a variable that I wanted to increase. So changing ways of thinking, I wanted to increase the changing ways of thinking, because this is one of the main ideas here in the post, that you have to change your ways of thinking and learning. The more you learn, the better you are as a person. This is what I understand from the post. So I said to myself, I will start thinking about these 2 things as 2 important stocks that have to be increased in one way or another, and I have to see how to increase them. And there is also the word telos that I made here. The telos, I just wrote telos because it's not known. Because I understand that when we change our ways of thinking, our telos is going to change. It's going to improve, in other words. Our perception of the telos is going to improve. The telos, the reason why we exist, the reason why I am studying, that I am working, that I am doing things. This is what I understand. I have wrote other things, other variables here, plentiful, and this isn't usually the way that we do systems thinkings. We usually focus on very specific variables, as few as possible, because we cannot cover all of them. They are going to be overwhelming. However, I just put them here as I elicited them from reading the post. Now we have not only telos, but we have a clarity of telos. Do we have a clarity of the telos itself? Do we understand our goal in life? And this correlates very well with the changing ways of thinking. And this reminds us of a piece of wisdom that somebody says. It is that we cannot solve a problem by using the same way of thinking that we had used when we created this problem in the first place. So we have to change our ways of thinking. And this reminds us of the paradigm shift, the theory that we have to do a paradigm shift in order to improve when thinking about the same way, the same thing is not leading us anywhere. And this reminds us of the epistemological obstacle. When we are in an obstacle and we feel that we are unable to learn anything or to solve any epistemological problem, then we have to get some kind of epistemological break to break away from that. And this is the paradigm shift that we have to do. I start with these things that we have, and let's just try to see where to start first of all. So we have working and doing. Doing, what does do? So you work and work and work and work and you do things. What I understand is that, first of all, now let's see first of all the perception, the wrong perception, or the perception that is not acceptable, actual success. Now here, imagine that we say that if working increases, then actual success increases. And this is, you see, by doing this, we have in fact ignored all other variables. And certainly from the first glance even, this one doesn't work. So yes, the post here which says, it's not the work that makes you successful. It's very logical, by the way, and we have lots of variables. You cannot simply say that working means actual success and that's all. What about other things? But let's say something different, and we can draw these relations in different ways. Let's say working or doing, when you increase your work, when you work more, you experiment more. When you experiment more, then probably you will see challenges. So experiment, challenges increase. When challenges increase, then it is good to say that mistakes increase. You can have mistakes. Now when mistakes happen, what will happen after mistakes? Are you going to be frustrated, or are you going to have pleasant feelings? What the post says here is that something happens and makes you learn and makes you persist. She says persistence. So how could mistakes lead to persistence? I can link it here. When you have mistakes, you reflect on those mistakes. You reflect on those mistakes. So the more you have, the more mistakes you have, the more reflection you have. And when you reflect more, what happens is that you are changing your mind. Changing your mind, changing your thinking. But before that, let's see, yes, you change your ways of thinking. So let's say that mistakes make you think. Thinking, of course, happens all the time. And I'm going just to remove this. I'm going to remove this connection and say that the more mistakes you have, the more thinking you have. And the more thinking you have, what will happen? The more reflection you reflect. Why did A succeed? Why did B fail? And when you make reflections, you are in fact testing your hypotheses. You are experimenting with your hypotheses. And at the end of the day, you are changing them. You say, yes, it didn't work in this way, it worked in that way. And this is what we say, changing ways of thinking. And when we have changing ways of thinking, what will happen after changing ways of thinking? There will be, in fact, changing ways of thinking. We can see I just wrote lots of them. So what will happen? There will be learning. You're learning something new. And when you learn something new, satisfactory things happen. You are very happy. And when satisfactory things happen, you have pleasant feelings. And when you have pleasant feelings, you want the experience to be repeated. You want to repeat the work over and again. And here you have persistence. And when you persist on doing something, you do it again, working again. So out of those variables, I've got this loop. There's a loop now here. And it starts with working that leads to learning from experiment. When you learn from the experiment, when you face the experiment, it raises challenges. Challenges also, by the way, can lead to negative feelings. So challenges can increase negative feelings. So what are we going to do with the negative feelings? We have to reduce those negative feelings. We have to reduce those negative feelings, and this is not any variable here that can happen, I believe, to reduce the negative feelings. It has to be something else. I don't know what it is, but something has to come here in order to reduce the negative feelings. Is it peer-to-peer review? Is it, for example, going on vacation? What are we going to do to reduce the negative feelings? I'm not sure about it. So the other question is, how do the number of skills increase? And what happens after they increase? I don't know how to put it here. What about the perceived success? Perceived success is something negative. We want just to reduce it, to make people understand actual success, what it looks like, not perceived success. We want something to lead to actual success. And finally, what is the telos? What is, at the end of the day, the reason why we exist, the reason that we are learning, the reason that we are working at the end of the day? All of these, as you can see, just I left them here, and I don't really know how to answer this question. But by understanding at least that if A then B is not always a good way of thinking, it is not the linear thought that we have to live our life. In fact, this is what I think. I have tried just to explain what this post is about, and once again I will read it. Working, or in other words doing something hard, is not what makes you successful. So in other words, if A then B is not accurate here, she says, it is not automatically conceived. Actual success is your work on yourself, your development of skills, and your learning from every experience, from every learning experience, in other words. The chair and the position are not a criterion of success. The criterion is in your thinking, in your persistence, in your ethics. These make the difference. Let your work be a means and not a goal, in other words, not a telos. I still find it really intriguing to talk more about this post because I really like it, but as I said, the video is going to be too long otherwise, and I try just to plot the screen with some variables. Maybe you can have other variables to see what other things can happen, how they can be increased or decreased depending on what we want at the end of the day. I'm throwing this into the theory. Maybe our discussions can reveal more things to have here, but the last thing I would just conclude with is, what are we going to do in order to change our ways of thinking, not only of the students but also of ourselves, not only of the fresh graduates but also of the professionals as well? How can we help each other in removing the misconceptions and to understand the difference between what is genuine and what is simply a perception?